with that, I think we have our next session now. And for that, we are really delighted to have with us Professor Melvin George. Professor Melvin George, currently General Secretary of Association of Clinical Pharmacologists, and he is the head at the Center for Clinical Pharmacology, SRM Medical College and Hospital and Research Center located at Chennai. So he will tell us about innovation to implementation, clinical trials of medical devices under Indian regulations. As due to some inconvenience, we not get Professor Shantanu Kumar Tripathi in the inauguration session, and Association of Clinical Pharmacologists is an integral part of this symposium of International Clinical Trial Day celebration. So may I also ask, before his lecture, Professor Melvin George to tell us about our Association of Clinical Pharmacologists, and then, sir, please proceed for your lecture.
Thank you, Dr. Shambho. I'll just try to share my slides first to check if it's working. Are you able to see it?
Yes, sir. Yes, it is
okay.
full screen now.
Yeah. So at the outset, I wish to thank Dr. Shambho and team for giving me this opportunity to talk about this topic, clinical trials of medical devices under Indian regulations. So before I start, Dr. Shambho said about ACP. I'm happy to tell that Association of Clinical Pharmacologists is a society that is formed a year ago officially, and the main purpose of the society is to take the clinical pharmacology as a discipline, to the next level, especially in terms of training the next generation of youngsters who are trained in the subject of clinical pharmacology, help them to be part of clinical pharmacology consultations in terms of optimizing treatment outcomes, in terms of improving regulatory practice in the context of clinical trials, and many other salient aspects of clinical pharmacology, and take the profession of clinical pharmacology to the next level. So I thank Dr. Shambho and the organizers for giving me this opportunity to talk about this topic. In these few words, we'll start discussing this issue. So this is the picture of MRI scanner, as you can see. But the important thing about this picture is that what is mentioned right below, and that is the fact that this is not just a simple MRI machine, but this is a indigenously developed MRI scanner, which is something definitely we can consider this a big deal in the Indian scenario, because for a long time we have been dealing with Indian medical devices, by and large, has largely catered around developing simpler, non-sophisticated devices. And we have been heavily dependent on the developed market like Western Europe and US for higher grade, higher risk devices. And that is what is now changing slowly. This is something that happened 2 years ago. And in the coming years, with improved changes in the regulations and all that, we can expect this to become more and more common. So how big is the medical device market in India? No, it is said that around presently it's around 11 billion US dollars. And as I told you before, this is a market that is heavily import dependent. That is almost 75% of the total market size is said to be import dependent. That means we are largely dependent on the outside markets for the medical devices, and indigenously developed devices are yet there is still a dearth of companies which are bringing out indigenously developed medical devices. Approximately there are 1,000 manufacturing sites in medical device in India around, and also along with medical devices, even in vitro diagnostics and in vitro diagnostic kits are also being manufactured, and that also comes under the similar regulations. And this is one sector that allows 100% foreign direct investment. And the price control for most of the medical devices, as of now, it is not that stringently regulated, except in the case of cardiac stents and knee implants. This is the picture, a little dated picture it is, but nevertheless, it brings out an important point, and that is about how much India is dependent on imports with respect to the sophistication of technology. As you can see, as the graph moves towards the right, you can see the level of imports is more. And as the graph moves on the y-axis vertically, you can see the level of sophistication of the technology is higher. So you can see extreme bottom left. This is where we have unsophisticated medical devices, for example, bandages, gloves, suture materials, all these simpler medical devices, you can find it here. And this is where we are not dependent much on imports. But when you talk about really sophisticated things like orthopedic implants or ophthalmic instruments, dental products, okay, and all these more sophisticated devices, or even imaging for that matter, you can see that there is a lot of dependency on the imports. Okay, and that is what we need to change. And that is exactly what is being addressed currently by the government of India to see that the market shift happens. So, which are the areas in India where currently medical devices are largely being manufactured? If you see, it's largely Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, and Tamil Nadu and Kerala, and also from Haryana. On the other spectrum, we also see that occasionally we get news, just like how we have fake drugs, we also have fake medical equipment manufacturing, and occasionally it gets busted, and that is what the regulations is trying to see, that all these practices are minimized. So how are medical devices regulated in India? We'll have a brief understanding of this before we go into the context of how clinical trials with medical devices are done. So for a long time, Drugs and Cosmetic Act 1940 and Drugs and Cosmetic Rules 1945 was what was the rule for all medical device companies. So the same as how drugs were regulated, the same rules applied to medical devices also. There were no separate guidelines for regulating devices. As a result of that, it is very much an open market, and a lot of ambiguity was there for companies as to how to proceed further. And whenever ambiguity is there, it does not make it favorable for industry to come up and set shop. And that is what changed in 2017 when we started having a unique regulations for medical devices, and that is called MDR 2017. MDR 2017 is the Indian regulations for medical devices. Just like how for drugs we have NDCT 2019, for medical devices we have MDR 2017. Those are the rules exclusively for Indian, for all manufacturers, be it global or Indian manufacturers who want to set up manufacturing or who want to do a clinical trial in India for medical devices. All those things come under MDR 2017 rules. And there was some amendment of these rules in 2020. And then apart from this, we also had a medical devices policy in 2023, which is more like a visionary document, which I will talk about towards the end. So for a long time, the original definition of the Drugs and Cosmetic Act also included such devices intended for internal or external use, the diagnosis, treatment, mitigation, or prevention of disease or disorder in human beings, as specified from time to time by the central government as an official gazette. For, as you can see in this slide, these devices, that is disposable syringes, needles, perfusion sets, they were considered as drugs as per the original Drugs and Cosmetic Act. And in 2005, some more devices were added to be considered as drugs. So meaning these were all the devices that had some kind of regulations under the Drugs and Cosmetic Act. There was some kind of regulation in place using the same Drugs and Cosmetic Act. Okay, and all that changed with the medical device rules that came into existence. And the medical device rules, if you see, talks about how the authorities are constituted, what are the classification of medical devices, what are the processes for manufacture, sale, distribution, import, and labeling of medical devices, how are clinical trials to be done. So normally we use the word clinical trials in the context of drugs, but for medical devices, the terminology they used is clinical investigation. Okay, clinical investigation. So clinical investigation, just a fancy word for saying clinical trials for medical devices. Okay, so it is not any way different. It's just that the terminology changes. So a protocol for a medical device is called a clinical investigation plan. Okay, so apart from this, the medical device rules talks also about import and manufacture of medical device, which doesn't have a predicate device. That means there is no existing standard in the market for that particular medical device. It's a totally novel medical device that is coming out for the first time. There is no precursor, there is no similar product of that kind in the market. So in such cases, how it is to be handled. And then it also talks about who is designated as medical device officer, device testing officer, and it also talks about something called as a notified body. So what exactly is notified body? So notified body is a private agency which has been conferred a status of having the ability to go and inspect device manufacturing plants and give their approvals. So these are independent private organizations that are given the accreditation for going and inspecting facilities and giving the approvals for those facilities, and that is called notified body. And then we have, it also talks about registration of laboratories for testing and sale of medical devices and export of device and exemptions. And then medical device rules also has certain schedules. I'll not go into those details. So how do you classify medical devices? Now this is very important, okay, because the rules change based on what class our product is coming under. So we have class A, B, C, and D. If you look at the US FDA and EMA, it's more like class 1, 2, 3, but more or less the principle is similar. A and B refer to devices which are considered low risk or low to moderate risk, whereas class C and class D are devices which have a high risk, okay? And so there is a risk of safety issues are higher, and so it needs more regulation. In general, class A, class B devices are devices which are largely regulated by the state regulatory authorities, whereas class C and class D, because of the high risk, they are regulated by the central licensing authority, that is the CDSCO. Currently, CDSCO does not have a separate office, a separate branch for the medical devices. There is, of course, a medical device section, but it's largely called CDSCO only, the device section. And if you can see this this table, I just want you to focus on this particular row, requirement to provide data for devices without a predicate device. Clinical investigation not required for class A and B, whereas for class C and D, clinical investigation is required. So essentially what they're telling is, if your device comes under class C and class D, there is a higher chance for the regulatory authority to tell you to provide clinical trial data or clinical investigation data. Whereas for low risk devices like which come under class A and B, it is essentially the not required. Now, how do I know whether my device comes under class A, B, C, D? So there is a notification that is already provided by CDSCO. Apart from that, if you're coming out with a new device and then you have, according to you, it belongs to one particular class. No, you cannot just like that go ahead and project it as a class C or class B device. We would need to get that also approved by the CDSCO, and they need to tell us which class our novel device comes under, if it is a device which does not have any predicate. So this I told you, central licensing authority, state licensing authority, and we have a national accreditation body which certifies the notified bodies on going and regulating sites which manufacture medical devices. And The standards for medical devices in India that we follow is the Bureau of Indian Standards or any other standards. And every medical device company is expected to have something called as a ISO 13485 quality management system. So in order to get the approval of their product in the market, they need to show a proof that the medical device company is having a quality management system in place. So the standards that is used for that is ISO 13485. It is nothing but a standard that is quality management system that is in place for the design component of the medical device as well as the manufacturing component of the medical device. So since 2020, the medical device amendment rules have given a clear definition and which they have said that all devices need to be regulated totally under MDR rules. For the definition is also again given those which are essentially devices which are used for diagnosis, prevention, monitoring, treatment, or alleviation of disease disorder, and which is not using which does not achieve the primary action on the human body by any pharmacological or immunological or metabolic means. So if the product is not achieving its action by pharmacological, immunological or metabolic means primarily, then that product is considered a medical device. And also the under which the specific purposes it's mentioned here: diagnosis, prevention, monitoring, treatment, and supporting sustaining life, disinfection of medical device, and control of consumption. So in medical devices also, we sometimes undertake preclinical research, that is preclinical activities, to determine whether the device is safe and effective enough for use with human subjects. So this could have bench testing, which is basically looking at the components of the medical device in the lab to see whether it is safe and to see whether the technical specifications are okay as per the standards. Sometimes it is possible to use computer simulations of the medical device to test and see how the device is likely to behave in a particular context. And in a few instances, if it is possible to also use animals, then they should be used. And once the manufacturer believes that the device is ready for clinical trials, they must first get approval for their proposed investigation with all this preclinical data. So the bench testing is largely the workshop testing. So for this also, there are medical device companies which are large, which might have its own facilities for doing this bench testing. Otherwise, these days there are also something called as device parks established in different parts of the country, where a small startup company can go and test their medical device. This bench testing process can be done at that device park to assess the performance and safety of the device. Then we have the technical testing, which is basically the engineering and quality testing of the materials, the individual components, the electronic and mechanical elements of the device to see for its accuracy as well as reliability. And the prototype is usually rebuilt using this different materials. And then we have computer simulations and animal studies, which are done as and when possible. The form and the medical device rules, it uses the form MD 2022, which is the form that is used to conduct clinical investigation. So if you are having a medical device company and you're planning to do a clinical trial, you need to apply using the form MD 2022, MD 22, and send that to the licensing authority along with the registration fee. And the central licensing authority will evaluate the application. And if they find that the data is fit, that this clinical trial, there is sufficient data to go and conduct the clinical trial, then the permission is granted. And this is the guideline for that form MD22. So I'm not going into the details of that. So in drug trials, we talk about phase 1 testing, phase 2 testing, and phase 3 testing. Whereas in device trials, we talk about pilot study, which is also called a feasibility study, and then pivotal study. There are only 2 major studies that are done. So the pilot study is the initial study that is done in human beings to acquire essential information about the device before moving on to pivotal studies. So pilot studies are done in a smaller group of subjects, largely exploratory in nature. Its objective is to find the preliminary safety and device performance in humans, and also to guide device, whether the device has to be modified, whether future study design should be changed, and also to identify which are the patients who are most likely to respond to the particular medical device. It will help in designing the inclusion, exclusion, eligibility criteria for the subsequent pivotal study. And then we have the pivotal or confirmatory, definitive confirmatory study conducted in a larger number of participants, 100 to 300 maybe, to gather evidence of safety and efficacy. This is equivalent to the phase 3 clinical trial that we have with drugs. And for medical device which doesn't have a predicate device but approved outside India, pivotal studies definitely need to be carried out. And prior to conducting a pivotal clinical investigation in Indian subjects, CDSU may require pilot study data generated in Indian population first before it goes to pivotal study. Okay, so this is something that the CDSU might insist. And this just to show what are the different components of a clinical investigation plan. So as you can see here, you can forget the top part of this, but the bottom part you can see here. Basically, we have to a protocol of a medical device clinical investigation plan should talk about rationale of why we need this particular medical device. What is the need for this medical device? What is the current scenario in the market? Do we have alternative devices available? What is the safety and efficacy of those devices? How is patient care going to be changed because of the entry of this device? All that need to be first proposed. What is the comparator that we are going to assess when we have our medical device? If is the comparator available? And of course, what is the clinical development stage? And what is the design that you're going to use? So traditionally, RCTs are always considered the gold standard for generating evidence for efficacy and safety. But there is a possibility that sometimes you might not have a comparator to begin with, and then you will have to do a single arm clinical trial, and then it will almost be like a single arm interventional study, and then you will not have a comparator. You will have to see the effect after giving the device when compared to a patient's data without the medical device, and define what are the primary objectives, what are the primary endpoints, what are the secondary endpoints, and particularly look at safety endpoints, and is there any other exploratory endpoints that can be had, which are the ideal patients, for whom is this device? Is this device for screening people in the community? Is this device for identifying or diagnosing patients? Is it device being used for treating patients? All those things need to be clarified. And the inclusion exclusion criteria obviously is very important, because we need to find the right people who are going to be needing this in the clinical context, and what is the sample size that need to be considered for providing the outcome, and how long is the study going to be taking place, and what are the statistical analysis plan that you are going to carry out. So by and large, it's more or less like a standard clinical trial, of course, with the particular issues that we are dealing with in the context of primary and secondary endpoint, and choosing which is the most optimal outcome that can be taken as primary outcome that can show good efficacy and safety results. After a device is launched in the market, the regulator might say that since we are approving this device for marketing approval, but we also want you to continue providing us data. And then it has to be done in thousands of participants, where you give data of patients who are using the device after it reaches the market. This to monitor more of long-term effectiveness. Safety data in a larger population is more likely to identify rare events and how the device is behaving when it is used in the general population. All this comes out in the post-marketing clinical investigation plan. And it's required basically by CDSU for optimizing the intended use of the medical device. So the government of India has come out with a lot of initiatives. So I'll try to skip these slides because we already are crossing the time. But essentially what I want to say is that there are several schemes that have been brought out by the government of India to encourage manufacturers to set up shop in India and develop medical devices. So this is a list of some of those initiatives. And some of the states have also come up with medical device parks, which are essentially used to support the startup ecosystem in India, so that more startup companies can come up build medical devices so that indigenously developed medical devices can be approved in the market. And one of the important things about developing indigenous medical devices is that if you see the hospital care cost that a patient has to go through, one of the things that a large amount of the billing goes is the equipment that a patient is using in the hospital. And many of these equipments are currently imported equipment, so it's going to be expensive. So the hospital has to get back that return on that investment, and that is from our own patient bills. So if we have indigenously developed medical devices that are manufactured in India, this is going to all reduce a lot. The billing and the financial burden on the patient is likely to reduce. Finally, I'll just say that there is something called as National Medical Device Policy 2023, which has come out, which is a policy that is expected to take up the medical device sector growth from its current $11 billion to $50 billion by 2030. So it has developed, the government has brought out with different strategies so that ultimately there is more access to medical devices, devices which are used more for prevention of diseases, affordable devices, and also developing a system, an ecosystem where we have trained manpower. Currently, there is no course for developing medical devices in India. So to bring out such kind of courses, to bring out such kind of skilled manpower, and also to improve the quality of medical devices, to ensure security of the medical devices, and also patient-centered quality care, and to improve the research and innovation for all these, this medical device policy has come out. So to help to, what are the strategies that the government has brought out? Basically streamlining the regulatory system so that there is a single window system for approvals, attracting investments from foreign players, enabling infrastructure, human resource development, facilitating R&D and innovation, and brand positioning and creative awareness creation. All this are some of the strategies to improve the medical device sector so that ultimately we have more of indigenously developed medical devices. So for shortage of time, I'm skipping all these slides. So the Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship is keenly involved in developing the skilled manpower and brand positioning I mentioned. And Niti Aayog is directly monitoring this using certain metrics. In fact, there is something called as MedTech Mitra that has been developed since 2 years, where ICMR, CDSCO, Niti Aayog, all of them have come together and developed a system wherein if a company wants to develop their medical device in India, once they approach this portal, MedTech Mitra, the MedTech Mitra through the system, ICMR can actually give them support using the Intent Clinical Trial Network, where they have hospitals which can do clinical trials. They connect these hospitals to the medical device companies and also give them their academic support in terms of how best to design the protocol and how best to position the product so that the regulatory approvals are also obtained in a timely manner. So to conclude, I will say the medical device industry is a thriving industry. It's a growing industry, and all these new regulations that have come up in recent years is going to augur well for the market to have patients having our own indigenously developed devices. And this is quite a huge development from where we were 30 years back, 40 years back, when it was under the Drug Regulatory Authority. And Medical Device Policy 2023 has immense potential to transform the device industry substantially if implemented as stated. So thank you for your patient listening. I'll try to answer questions if there are any.
Thank you very much, Professor Melvin George, for this elaborative lecture. And I think this is very important for all of us who are using various instruments, various devices in our day-to-day clinical practice and research. I think we have one very important question in the from the delegates. May I ask you, just reading out that question for you. As a practicing physician, I often encounter medical devices that enter clinical use through limited post-market surveillance. How can regulatory pathways in India be strengthened to ensure that innovations in medical devices are both rapidly accessible, and rigorously validated through clinical trials that reflect real-world usage in diverse healthcare settings. This has been asked by one physician. I think Dr. Melvin
Okay.
George, please.
Yeah. So thank you for the question, Dr. Shambhu. So I do agree that currently the system is such that there are a number of devices where the regulate if they're able, if the device company is able to convince the regulator that in terms of safety, the medical device that is in question is considered a very low risk device. Now then they can actually come out of that mandatory requirement to perform clinical trials, and the regulator might say, okay, provide us post-marketing data. So that is the way they can position their product and convince the regulator. And maybe if they are already having a predicate device, all this can be done. But if it is a device that is more like a class C, class D device, it doesn't even have a proper predicate device, then it is very unlikely for the regulator to just like that ask them to do post-marketing studies and to avoid the preclinical, pre-marketing approval studies. So my guess is that the product that they are talking about is something like very less chance of any safety issues, a very less chance of any untoward incidents occurring in terms of its patients, therapeutic efficacy, and no safety issues.
I think this is again another question which is very much related to this. What about pathology testing kits? Do all manufacturers to get their kits validated? This is the question. I want to again add something to that because many pharmaceutical industry, they are providing us certain free tests through their own machines, through their own, we can say, point of care devices, and they are giving us the HbA1c result, or for an example, LDL values, for an example, triglyceride values, urine albumin creatinine ratio. But the thing is that with that particular result, if we decide our treatment plan, we may land up into certain complications. So how we should safeguard us? How we
Yes.
can balance between that? So please, sir.
So, yeah, thank you for the question. So, there are two issues here. So, when you're talking about utilization of clinical calculators, clinical ratios, and things of that kind, I believe our a gold standard should be the guidelines, the treatment guidelines. So, most of the established diseases, I mean, where there is an established guideline for many of the common diseases, they would have some commentary on what is the current status with respect to utilization of that particular model, that particular risk score. Okay, in such kind of scenarios, we could just go by what the guidelines says. Now, when you're talking about in vitro diagnostic kits, it is a dicey issue because I understand, as you rightly said, there are some players who, even though they do not have a proper marketing license for their product, it is being sold. In fact, sometimes it is, if you look at even this biomarkers that are used for research, they don't need to get any regulatory license for sharing their product. So it is only when it is coming under clinical testing for clinical care, where decision has to be taken about the patient life or his therapy and all that, it is only then they need to get this clinical testing, clinical validation, and such kits definitely require a validation and approval from the regulatory authority. They cannot avoid that. That is why you will find in non-diagnostic kits, which are meant for research, there will be a sticker mentioned on it, not to be used for patient purpose, for clinical care. So that means that it has not gone through the regulatory pathway as of now. It is as of now still under research. So there is a clear pathway that a manufacturer has to go through to get his product approved in the market for clinical testing.
So it is important to check the CDSU approval status if we are
Exactly.
using devices. So that
Absolutely.
should be the take-home message, I think. Very important. Thank you, sir. Another question, we can take these two questions together. One postgraduate students, he had asked that pilot study and pivotal studies need to be conducted in disease patients only. This is the
Yes.
first part. And
Yeah,
then
so again, it depends on what is the device that we are using in question. So generally speaking, most of the medical devices are going to be used in patients only. So it doesn't make sense to test that product in a group of healthy volunteers. So by and large, you will see medical device, both pivotal testing as well as pilot testing would be done in the clinical context. If you're talking about the preclinical study, that is before it goes to the regulatory authority, we are talking about bench testing and all that. There, you could even consider doing it in healthy volunteers to generate some data. For example, I want to see that after putting all the electrodes connected into the patient, there are no safety issues that are developed. So I fix that in a few 5-10 healthy volunteers and have the device data that is given for getting the pivotal pilot study approval. But largely, by and large, for pivotal and pilot study, we are talking about diseased patients.
Absolutely, sir. And I think we had conducted one small study on one of our cardiac autonomic neuropathy detection devices. They had purposefully told us to take a disease cohort and also the healthy volunteer cohort to check whether the sensitivity and specificity analysis. So, but in large, as you had mentioned, that we have to conduct it in diseased patients only. So now the next question, I think this could be answered in your manner, that what are the sample size in medical device trial in?
Yeah, so sample size considerations are the same as any other sample size calculation for clinical trials. So essentially, we need to know if you're talking about efficacy study, we need to know what is the minimum clinically accepted significant difference between the test and control that you're expecting, and that is the one that is going to drive the sample size calculation formula. So by and large, these statistical considerations of what is the alpha that you're setting, what is the beta that you're setting, all that, the same rules which you use for any other drug trial, that has to be applied even for a device trial. And of course, you have to see the logistics also. If you see device trials, you do not see the numbers that you see with drug trials. In drug trials today, I understand, I think Dr. Shambhu knows very well, that many of the diabetic studies, cardiovascular studies, we talk about numbers like 5,000, 10,000, 20,000. Those are not the numbers that you traditionally see with device trials. It's much more a smaller population. So they are also looking at logistics in the end, and they are much smaller trials than the drug trials.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. And I think we are really enlightened with your very much important lecture. And I think we all acknowledge that India is the hub, that means the innovation hub of world. And most probably for 4,000 or 5,000 years, India is showing the world the path of innovation. Now, when we talk about the transition from innovation to implementation, and there is one bridge, and in that bridge, I think this medical device, it is something innovation. So in that bridge, medical device trials or research is very important, which can tell us how we should use innovation and we can implement that in real world practice.